Crazy about the Netflix series Chimp Crazy? Then you'll want to hear what didn't get into the final cut. The whistleblower who stopped the cruelty, the terrible conditions she saw, and why she had to speak up. Next on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, Chimp Crazy, the Netflix documentary. If you think you've seen it all, you need to listen to the woman who volunteered there at Chimparty and saw everything behind the scenes at Chimparty and the bogus Missouri Primate Foundation. Angela Scott's her name. She was an unpaid volunteer for Connie Casey and saw how the chimps were caged and mistreated, from the way mothers had their babies stripped from them to the violent, abusive treatment the chimps endured, and then the personal stories of chimps like Connor, the Hallmark chimp. Whistleblower Angela Scott tells us more about what didn't get into Chimp Crazy on this edition of the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Angela Scott, thank you for being part of the PETA Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Apparently, some of your neighbors with big cars are excited too.
Yeah. I have to be outside. I apologize, but I have 9 dogs. I foster dogs, and it would be absolutely ridiculous. I have a 100-pound Rottweiler puppy that would just be sitting in my lap if she could right now.
Well, that just speaks to the heart of Angela Scott, that you foster 9 dogs.
9, and a hairless cat.
And like I said, that just tells the audience right here and now exactly who you are. But tell me more, Angela, about your background. What is your background in terms of animals, especially the chimps?
I actually have been around animals from as far back as I can remember. My grandmother was the president of a nonprofit society for a private zoo. And we used to go there with her on the weekends. We actually lived with my grandmother, and she was technically, I guess you would call her a monkey mom. We had a baboon that was in a circus. His name was Billy Bob. We had 2 tigers. So I got my experience with primates at a very young age. And I will never forget the first time I went to the National Zoo and I saw a chimp. It had the same birthday as me. And there was just something very attractive. I immediately fell in love. So I've been around animals for a very long time. I wanted to be a primatologist, and my grandmother suggested that I work in a biomedical research lab, as she did. She worked with dogs at the time. And I was really, really excited. I had no idea what I was getting into. And hindsight's 2020. So I got a job at BioQual/Diagnon in Rockville. And I was a chimpanzee caregiver. And it was one of the most exciting opportunities that I thought I had until I got to see, which they don't use chimps in biomedical research anymore, thank goodness. But what I saw was chimpanzees as young as 1 being research subjects for RSV. A 4-year-old chimp named Logan, who I befriended immediately, was a research subject for hepatitis B. And it was crushing my soul to watch these animals be housed singly with very little enrichment.
Boy, it must have really hit you hard when you saw the reality of what went on with the chimps, because you are the self-professed, chimp person. When you saw these chimps, something happened. I mean, you were in love, right?
Absolutely, I was in love. They nicknamed me Chimpanzee at this lab. I implemented an environmental enrichment protocol because they didn't have any. I I missed one day of work the entire duration that I was there. And it was because my sister was dying at the time and she had a doctor's appointment and I had to drive her. And it's funny because my sister actually died of AIDS. And she got an opportunistic infection, and there were rhesus macaques that were in this lab that were being tested on. And she and I had intimate conversations about biomedical research and lab testing. And even though she was dying, she didn't want animals to be tested on either. And it was, I literally wanted to stand out on the street and cry and say, do you know what's happening? I mean, this building was next to a restaurant, a very popular restaurant. It had no windows. You would never know what was going on. And every time I would leave the facility, I would say, nobody knows that there's 500 primates in this facility and horrendous things are happening. And I got to the point where I could barely look at myself in the mirror as a human being. I was distraught. And I got to the point where I was really depressed. And what I did was I started a petition in the lab. And the day after I started my petition, Dr. John Landon, the owner of the facility, who started it because his daughter was dying of cancer and he wanted to find a cure, walked in and said, effective immediately, you're terminated. I believe you're an active member of PETA. Ironically, I didn't even know what the acronym meant back then. I just was shocked and I burst out into tears. I was devastated because I really felt like you can see the souls of these animals. You know, they don't have vocal cords, they can't speak, but emotion transcends language. You see the emptiness, and it was literally, they knew that I loved them, and it was like they were saying, please help me. And it makes me tear up to just think about it. It makes me really sad. And
how old were you at the time?
19.
So you're a young
1998.
Yeah, you're a young 19. You're there, first job. They call you chimpanzee because you love these chimps. You were caring for them, and then you got the sense of reality that what they did to the chimps, and then what they did to you because they suspected that you were too friendly with the chimps. Really, huh?
Exactly what they suspected. I mean, people would have conversations. I would say things like, how's your monkey? I heard he was sick. And they would say, oh, he went to the autoclave, which is where they, burn the bodies after or he's a necropsy, which is what they do after they pass away. And so I was devastated. But Logan, I say this on a lot of things. There's a very famous quote by Mark Twain. It's called, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Well, I walked into Logan's cage the second day that I was there, and he leapt into my arms and gave me this maternal hug. And I cried. I was in tears. And I knew from that moment that I wanted to work with chimps. It was very surreal. And so right after I was terminated, I started going online and looking for other places that I could work. I wanted to work in a sanctuary. I didn't want to be in biomedical research anymore. Somebody recommended the Simian Society, and somebody from the Simian Society said, hey, you should reach out to Chimparty. Had no idea what it was. And that's what I did. I emailed Chimparty and I told them my history and what I wanted to do. And I was actually shocked that they responded. Mike Casey responded immediately to my email and said, we'd love to have you. So I packed all my things and drove with my dog out to Missouri.
Wow, that's like halfway across the country. You're on the East Coast. You drive to Missouri to be a part of Chimparty, which, for the benefit of people who have not seen Chimp Crazy, Chimparty is they rent out chimpanzees to parties? Is that what they?
Exactly what they did. They had a voicemail. I can even remember it to this day. And it was Mike saying, Chimparty is not a performing chimp act. It's not a circus. This is an opportunity to get up close and personal with these beautiful, great apes. And I thought it was an educational thing, and I was wrong. I saw one party, they put a baby chimp in a bikini, and she was supposed to be the only stripper that they could afford.
So at Chimparty, you drive there, you meet the owner, Connie Casey. And what was your first reaction to
Connie? I knew she didn't like me. That was the first impression that I got. She was very quiet, very private, very reserved. Mike was he was 6'3", 300 pounds, a former Marine.
And Mike again is Mike
Casey.
Oh, Mike Casey. Okay.
He was her husband, and he had a very domineering personality. And I'm a very submissive person. I guess it's the way I would characterize myself. I was a victim of child abuse, and I think I had victim written on my forehead because he had me under his thumb from day one. He was extremely abusive, not only to the animals, but to me. And I think he made a comment about my makeup or my shoes the first day I got there. So already I'm seeing red flags.
But you drove cross country. What was or halfway across the country? What was the deal? They were to hire you. You were going to work there, or you were a volunteer. What were your duties?
So I was strictly to be a volunteer. I got a job at Walmart. I didn't receive any compensation for what I did there. I lived on the property, and it was a nightmare. I don't know how else to describe it. The first thing I saw were 2 small chimps, Connor and Kelly, in the house in a cage. And I saw a baby that was maybe a couple of months old. And the first question I asked was, why isn't the baby with its mom? And Mike looked at me with this it was a very dirty look. And he said, captive chimps don't make good moms. They abandon their babies. It's not safe. They have to be taken from their mom. And at the time, I wasn't that aware of captive chimp moms. So I took it with a grain of salt, and boy, was I wrong. It was very early on that I had this feeling of dread, like, what have I gotten myself into? And I didn't know what to do because I had moved my entire life.
Yeah, you were living there with them essentially in their home, right?
Yes, in their home. And being watched. Everything I did was watched. Mike actually used to follow me to work to make sure that was where I was going. It was scary. And Connie didn't really talk to me very much. I could tell that she didn't care for me too much. And I guess maybe if I wouldn't want another woman in my house, maybe either. And I also questioned why they didn't have anybody else. There were 33 chimpanzees there when I got there.
In the house. In the house.
In the house. And I was the only person there as a designated caregiver per se. And seeing how when I went in the basement, the first thing I saw was that these chimps were in cages made out of actual jail bars that had been donated to Connie's previous husband. Her late husband had built these cages out of actual jail bars. And there were dead flies in their water buckets and a very strong smell of urine. And I was just thinking, this is an absolute disaster. And of course, I mean, I'm a very compassionate person. And the first thing I thought was, what can I do to make their lives better? So I started buying bubbles from Walmart, and I would go in the basement and I would blow bubbles for them. They weren't allowed to have blankets or any sort of enrichment because they would fight. And when chimps would fight, Mike would spray them with a water hose, and chimps don't like water. So the things that I could do were limited. I wasn't able to do a whole lot.
What did the bubbles mean to them? What did you do with the bubbles?
So it was just a way to stimulate them. I mean, they were fascinated, and I would blow them through the bars so they would actually pop them. It was actually, they were very engaged. And they were actually, Mike and Connie were concerned about how much time I was spending in the basement and thought that there was something wrong with me because I wasn't sort of all over the babies, which I guess is how most people are. I felt guilty. I didn't want to hold the babies because I knew in my heart that the moms had probably been traumatized, which I found out when I witnessed a baby being taken from its mom.
Well, tell me about that. What did you witness?
So that was the final straw for me. Tammy was a first-time mom, and what they do is they bring chimps who are in the basement up into the house, which is where all the chimps want to be because they're stimulated. There's always people around. There's TV on. There's things to do and things to see. And she was laying in a hammock with her baby, cradling him. It was a boy on her tummy. And Mike and Connie, I was standing in front of her. Mike and Connie were hiding behind a wall with a blow dart and ketamine. And they shot her with a blow dart. And she screamed. And I don't know the look on my face, but I imagine it was probably shocking. And she just fell onto the floor. And unfortunately, she actually fell on the baby. So Mike and Connie rushed over, and baby chimps have this need to hold on to something. So they have to simultaneously, while they're pulling them off, slip a blanket or a stuffed animal into their hand. So they have something to hold on to, because if they don't have that security, they scream. And then they drug Tammy's limp body back into the basement, put her in the cage with a blanket that she had been holding her baby with, and they gave her a basket of fruit as a consolation prize. And I was so upset. I didn't want to cry in front of Mike and Connie, so I went down into the basement because I wanted to be there when Tammy woke up. And she was screaming. And she vomited because ketamine is a very strong sedative. She was disoriented. And the very first thing she did was look for her baby. And I remember that she picked up the blanket. She was smelling it. And it was absolutely traumatizing. She was lying in a fetal position on top of a barrel that was in her cage. And she was lethargic and despondent and had just this soulless look in her eyes. And she continued to look for her baby for days. The cages are really small, but she was looking under things, moving things around. She carried the blanket that the baby was in for a long time. If she heard her baby whimpering upstairs, she would get extremely agitated and start to rock. I felt so bad for her. And I actually made the mistake of sort of trying to shove an orange into this gap in the mesh of her cage. And she actually grabbed my hand. I will never forget, because I pulled back so hard that I fell. I think that she was taking her anger out on me, which, I don't begrudge her for that.
Did she ever see her baby again?
Never. He was sold shortly after he was taken, and he was taken at about 3 days.
So let me get the process right here. So they actually bred the chimps there, and they gave birth there, and then they sold the babies?
Yes.
And then
baby after baby after baby after baby.
And you saw this repeated over and over again.
And Gabby, who was the most prolific breeder, her and Gabby and Coco were the most prolific breeding pair, had more than 15 babies. So every other year, she was darted over and over and over and had her infant kidnapped from her. In fact, they decided that Gabby, because she was such a good mom, she deserved to keep one of her babies. So they had taken him, it was a boy, they had taken him they let Gabby keep her babies for a couple weeks to get the colostrum. And because she was a great mom, this is back when we had VHS recorders, they took a video of giving him back. And I watched them wrap the baby in a blanket and put it in this little sort of box and then lift up the cage so she could grab it. And she grabbed it and she flung the blanket off and she started panting, which is what chimps do when they're so happy. And she was just holding him and kissing him, and she was so happy. And a year later, somebody called and they wanted a baby chimp, and they took him again. And I can't imagine.
Yeah. You can't imagine.
She must have known as soon as they isolated her from the other chimps what was going to happen.
This process, the breeding occurs, and then while she's mournful that her baby's taken away, does she get, she doesn't get rented out to parties. What kind of chimps get rented out to the parties? Mostly the babies, huh?
They have to be under the age of 7, preferably 6. That's about the time that they reach, they start going through puberty in captivity. It's much later in the wild, maybe 15, 13 when they have their first baby. These chimps were having babies as early as 11. So they can't use older chimps because, of course, of the danger that they pose to the public.
Right.
So they have to be young.
Gabby was, what was as soon as they started breeding her? You said 11 months?
Oh, no, she was 11. Tammy was 11 when she had her first baby. Gabby had already been there and was already older when I got there, but she was almost 50, I believe, when she passed away, and had been at Chimparty for over 30 years.
Wow.
So for 30 years, she experienced being forced to breed and then having her babies ripped away from her over and over and over. And in my opinion, that's tantamount to torture.
Yeah. So you witnessed all this. At one point, when did you say you stayed? You stayed and lived with the Caseys, right?
Correct. Multiple times. And here's the thing. I felt so guilty. I felt like there was nothing that I could do, but I also felt complicit because I felt like if I'm watching this happen and I'm not doing anything, then I am a part of it. And there's really no other way to see it, at least from my perspective at the time. And taking Tammy's baby was the first time that I left.
You actually left a couple of times and then you went back. And you're
correct.
All this time you're a volunteer working at Walmart, but then spending most of your time with Chimparty, right?
All the time. I didn't do parties until way later. I only did 2. I didn't do parties until 2005, and this was probably 2000. And I kept going back because I missed the chimps. And I felt like I was some sort of light in their life. And I know that sounds, crazy, but they had nothing to look forward to. These chimps are sitting in cages day in and day out with nothing. Nothing. They didn't even have glass windows when I worked there. They were in dark jail barred cages.
Tell me, what was not shown in HBO's Chimp Crazy? We got Chimparty. We got the fact that at some point, there was a lawsuit and the Caseys said, oh, we're going to call this the Missouri Primate Foundation. So I guess you were there when they changed the name to the Missouri Primate Foundation, right?
So what happened was Susie, who is Travis's mom, Susie, Coco, and Gabby escaped. Mike was out of town. Connie left the cage unlocked. And they got onto the neighbor's property. And Connie immediately noticed that they had gotten out and tranquilized them. Coco and Gabby, there was a young kid named Jason that lived next door. And there was some interaction. And Jason went into the house and got a shotgun, and that scared Coco and Gabby. And so they jumped into the truck. She had somebody drive a truck to sort of round them up. And Susie was on her way down, and she was sitting at the edge of his driveway with her back turned, playing in the grass. And Connie begged him not to shoot, but he said, that's my trophy. and he shot her in the back with a shotgun. And then she turned around and looked at him like, why? And he shot her in the face and he blew her jaw off. And she was choking on her own blood, and they worked on her for 2 hours. There was an ambulance. It was just crazy. There were so many people there. And usually the chimps are banging and displaying and doing all kinds of things when strangers are on the property, but you could hear a pin drop because they knew that Susie was dying, and they knew that people were there trying to help her. And I had, from the very first day that I got there, I said, why don't you go nonprofit, get a 501c3, and I offered to organize fundraisers for them so that they didn't have to use chimps in commercial work or as entertainment. That was my goal for a long time. And after the Susie incident, Mike and Connie weren't together for much longer after that, maybe a few years. And Connie called me and said, I did it. I went nonprofit. And I was so excited, but nothing changed other than the fact that you couldn't sell baby chimps anymore. She wasn't doing that. She wasn't taking chimps out to parties either. Other than that, nothing else changed.
But if she couldn't sell the chimps, what was she doing? She was just housing them?
Housing them.
Yeah. And she was preventing it changed the lawsuit somewhat because she was now the Missouri Primate Foundation. What was your role during all this? And when did you decide that enough was enough?
She actually went nonprofit in around 2007, so probably 8 years before the lawsuit. But, like I said, nothing changed. And in 2015, my mom's been a member of PETA for many years. She's been a vegan for 40 years. Before it was trendy, she was a vegan. And she called me, and I'll never forget, she called me and she said, Angie, PETA's going after Mike and Connie and the chimps. And the first thought I had was, please, God, let me help. And I reached out immediately, and I was put in contact with Brittany. And I said, Brittany, I'm a former volunteer, and I'd like to help. Prior to the enactment of the Endangered Species Act, captive chimps were not endangered and not subject to protection. So when the law changed, PETA actually had something to work with. The problem was, to litigate a case, you have to have evidence, right? So Brittany informed me, first of all, so many of the chimps that I had loved and spent so much time with had died of cancer, of some disease from lack of veterinary care. She had told me that the facility had gone way down, and she was right. She said, look, we haven't been able to get anybody into the facility to document what's going on. And I said, well, I know I can get in. And I called Connie and I said, I want to come visit the chimps. And she said, yes.
Now, at this point, how long had it been since you were in touch with Connie? I mean, first of all, when did you leave, and how long a period of time were you away from the Missouri, from Chimparty, AKA the Missouri Primate Foundation?
So it had been 8 years.
Wow, you kind of like really cut yourself off and went on
completely. And the only reason I even I wouldn't have gone back if Mike had been there, probably. I did actually call PETA in 2005, and I wanted to go in, but the cameras that they had back then had this big flannel shirt on, and I was just sure that you would be able to see it, and I couldn't do it. But I had wanted to help, and so this was PETA was my lifeline. And I can tell you from day one, PETA was committed to seeing those chimps free. And I saw how much commitment and how invested they were in helping, and I wanted to be a part of that.
So you call Connie after 8 years, and she lets you in.
Yes.
As a volunteer, same circumstances?
Oh, no. I just said I wanted to visit.
Oh.
I had a job at the time, and I hadn't been there for, like I said, many years, and I wasn't in a position to go move back to Missouri. So I just said I wanted to visit. And over the years, I had, emailed or called. I actually sent some donations that I had gotten, from doing fundraisers here in Maryland. So she said, sure, you can come, you can visit. And, I was given some glasses that had a camera, and I had my phone, and all I had to do was videotape what I saw. I mean, the evidence was there. Nothing had to be manipulated. It was horrendous. I mean, there were 15 dogs on the property, some of them that had injuries. There were goats and a zebra, and I mean, just so many animals. And there was a roach infestation. I mean, there were vermin. It was awful. It was just awful.
What about the chimps?
And
What was the situation for the chimps?
so many of them were overweight. Their teeth were horrible. The pink room, which is a room that they built onto the house. Over the years, they sort of built things onto the facility. And the urine smell was so bad. The ammonia was burning my lungs, and I actually couldn't go in. I had to record from the door because I couldn't go in. It was just too much for me. I couldn't do it. And so many chimps had died, and it was devastating. So I recorded everything that I could. And I left. But then I decided on my own, and I called Pete and I said, look, I want to go back. I want to get more. And so I went back a second time with my daughter, and I recorded again. And it wasn't, like I said, the evidence was there. I just had to record it. And I'm so happy that I did. PETA devoted years of time and resources, and they were so committed and so dedicated, and it was an honor to be a part of it. Truly.
So you got the evidence, but what wasn't shown in Chimp Crazy? So tell me one or two things that weren't shown that might help people who are watching Chimp Crazy understand what was at stake or what went on there.
I mean, here's the thing. Singly housing chimps, pet chimps, suffer so much psychological distress. Human beings can't facilitate the needs of a chimp. They're dangerous, and they're highly intellectual and highly social, and they require so much care. And people aren't seeing them sit in cages rocking incessantly and picking their hair out. They were bald. They had bald spots and wounds from self-inflicting harm. They're not seeing babies being ripped away from their moms to be sold for $60,000 to $65,000 to people who are happy to believe the false narrative that the moms abandoned them. The moms aren't good, to reconcile their own guilt, because anybody with an ounce of compassion knows that the mom had to suffer some sort of psychological stress having her baby ripped away from her. And they don't see chimps that don't have their teeth, because people that had them in the circus, as a safety precaution, had all of their teeth removed. People don't see how they're kept when they're not out and on photo ops. They're kept in cages that are too small, that they get absolutely no attention. Their lives are absolutely hopeless. And
so people who saw Chimp Crazy versus what you saw, what percentage actually got into Chimp Crazy?
5%. Maybe.
5%.
I mean, they didn't touch on, the trade of selling baby chimpanzees. I mean, it's almost pushed chimps in the wild to extinction. Coco, the alpha male there, was actually a wild caught chimp. And Connie says that his whole family was murdered just to get this one baby. I mean, it's supply and demand. People see the product. They don't see the process. You see this baby monkey. You see this baby chimp. You don't see the method employed to take this infant from their mom. I mean, history is going to judge us. And how do we treat our most vulnerable? They're completely at our mercy. And I want to be on the right side of history. Tonia was going to kill Tonka to avoid culpability. She said he couldn't make the drive to save the chimps, but sedated because of his heart disease. But she tranquilized him twice and threw him in the back of a truck and drove him to Ohio from Missouri, which is a 6-hour drive. She did that twice. She dropped him off in a place with a person he didn't know, with chimps he didn't know, and he was severely injured. He had 360 stitches because he didn't know the chimps, and chimps are dangerous even to other chimps. I mean, this is what this woman does, and I get that she's entertaining, but I don't understand how animal abuse is attractive, or how, and she continues to exploit animals. She's selling merchandise on her Instagram account with pictures of Tonka. She's still profiteering off of these animals, and it's sad.
Now, you never met Tonia Haddix.
Boy,
you don't know her. You don't know her. You don't meet her. You never met her.
Never met her. Never met her. She was Connie, because Connie hates PETA way more than she loved her chimps. They thought that it would moot the lawsuit to sign the chimps' ownership over to Tonia, which I mean, this woman had no chimpanzee experience at all, which in and of itself is extremely dangerous. And to sign them over to this woman who is just, I mean, in my opinion, she's almost worse than Connie. I mean, I think Connie is maybe sick, and that's still not an excuse for what she did, but this woman cares absolutely nothing about anyone or anything except for her. And this is just money hungry exploitation of animals, and she's continuing to do it. And no, I don't know her. I would love to be on an interview with her. And I couldn't believe it when Jared, who is the wonderful litigator, Jared Goodman, who litigated this case, told me, we knew she had Tonka. We knew that she was hiding Tonka. Tonia, I didn't have to know that Tonia was a liar to know that Tonka is the equivalent of just the sweetest person that you could ever meet. It's a great, great chimpanzee, very docile, very kind, very loving. But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What she did, was premeditated, and she did it with malice. She was going to kill this animal to avoid culpability. And she had him scheduled to be killed on July the 2nd. And thank goodness this documentarian team came forward and provided PETA with the evidence they needed to get Tonka out of there, because he wouldn't be here now if it weren't for them. And she was going to have him in her basement alone. My theory, and I'm pretty sure about this, the whole reason that she went to Connie's in the first place was because she wanted a baby chimp. I think she was going to get a female, and I think she was going to breed Tonka. That's what I think her goal was. That's what I believe. And I mean, there's this misconception spread by people who exploit these animals, and it's that once they're raised as a human in a human environment, that they can't be successfully integrated back into groups with other chimps, and that's just completely not true. Accredited sanctuaries have successfully integrated chimps back into large family groups because they are proficient in their knowledge of the complexities of chimp society. And people think that raising a wild animal in a human environment is going to somehow remove the wild from them. You can take their teeth out. You can neuter them. At the end of the day, this is still a wild animal with wild animal instincts. And all of these instincts are being suppressed. And ultimately, you know, you can't have people walking around with pet chimps in society because of the safety risks that it poses. So what they do is one of three things happens. When they're no longer serving their purpose at around 7 or 8, they're too strong. It's expensive to house them. They get dumped. They go to a lab. They go to a circus. They go to a zoo, private or public. They get out and get murdered or killed. You know, Travis, Susie, Buck. I mean, this isn't a coincidence that they were all shot to death. Or they spend the rest of their life, which is up to 50 to 60 years in captivity, in a cage with maybe a padlock around their neck with nothing, absolutely nothing.
But they breed, right? And you're talking about the mothers who are in that breeding cycle.
Correct. And they do it over, like I said, over and over and over again.
Now, let me ask you this, just a few more questions, and I really, I really appreciate your time, Angela. You saw Chimp Crazy. What was your overall feeling about the documentary?
So I'm so grateful that they shined a light on the black market and the demand. I mean, because what it's about at the end of the day is supply and demand. You know, people want baby chimps. If I walked into PetSmart with a baby chimp right now, people would run up to me and say, "Oh gosh, can I pet it? I want one." You know, I'm happy that they did that. I'm happy that Tonka got a happy ending. But there are so many more Mikes and Connies and Tonias and Chimparties and so many chimps still suffering right now because of people like this. And I wish that the focus wasn't so much on this walking tanning bed with a bad wig who professes that she's the Dolly Parton of chimps. I wish that it was more about the animals. I wish that they would have included the torture that they go through, the abuse that they go through. Mike was one of the most abusive. I mean, he punched chimpanzees in the face. You know, he spit at them. He threw shoes at them. He sprayed them with water, with a high-powered water hose for 15 minutes. I mean, this is torture. This is torture. I mean, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, we are their voice. And I mean, I just want to encourage other people who are in a similar situation to what I was, to speak up. I mean, at the end of the day, my loyalty was and will always be to the chimps and not to Connie and not to Mike. And we are their advocates. There's nothing, you know, evil only persists because good people do nothing. And like I said, when you see wrong and you do nothing, it's complicit. It's complicit. And I felt, when I finally reached out to PETA, I felt so good. It was something that I wanted to do for so long. And I was absolutely amazed at how hard PETA worked, at the resources. I mean, the donations really do go to the animals. I mean, PETA's sole mission is to free animals from these horrible situations. And like I said, we see the product, not the process. I mean, if people saw an unconscious chimp having her baby ripped away from her and then being drugged back into a cage and screaming at the top of her lungs, looking for her baby, doing everything but crying. And I mean, would people buy it? I mean, what kind of sales pitch is that? I darted this mom. I tranquilized her, ripped her baby from her, even though she desperately wanted to keep her baby, because I saw Gabby I saw Gabby with her baby. She was a phenomenal mom. Chimpanzees are amazing moms. In the wild, baby chimps are with their moms until the age of 5. They ride their mom for 3 to 6 months in the front and for up to a year on their back. They have this intimate, close bond that can't be approximated by a person. I mean, it just only ends tragically for everybody involved.
And so you have no regrets being a whistleblower?
I would do it over and over and over again if I could. I wish that I hadn't done it sooner. That is my only regret. I wish the laws were stronger. I wish this, the Environmental Safety Act had been passed many years before, because I would have reached out to PETA, way before. I mean, it's the right thing to do. I mean, there's no right way to do something wrong. There's no right way to do something wrong. And if we don't stand up for them, then they don't have anybody. I mean, we literally have to be their voice. We are their voice. And I really hope that all the chimps that are out there suffering, it's imperative that we pass the Captive Primate Safety Act. And I would encourage people who hear this and who feel compassion to contact their state, federal legislator and sign the petition. I mean, people say, oh, that's horrible. Yes, that's sad. Yes, it's, but we need action. Saying it's horrible. I mean, stop following people I see baby chimps on Instagram every single day. I watched a Facebook video that went viral of a chimp that got a puppy. I mean, we humanize them when they're babies and when they're cute and when they're in clothes and we're feeding them bottles, and we demonize them when they act like the wild animals that they are. It's just so unfair. You can take the animal out of the wild. You can't take the wild out of the animal. And it's up to us. I mean, there really is nobody else. And so if people out there are in similar situations, please speak up.
Angela, I appreciate your time spending with us here on the PETA podcast. I can tell you get very emotional. Times you seem to be moved to tears just from the memory. How are you doing personally? How are you dealing with the fame of Chimp Crazy and just knowing that there are still many, many more chimps out there in situations similar to the ones at Chimparty and the Missouri Foundation?
So I don't know if people know this, but if they saw me in Chimp Crazy, they might notice that I was about 60 pounds heavier. I gained so much weight because, Oreos are vegan. I mean, I was consumed with guilt because I was scared that if we didn't win the lawsuit, what would happen? I was also so sad that Connor, who I met when he was just a little guy and he was the first chimp that I rocked to sleep. He was the Hallmark chimp. And
Hallmark chimp meaning the kind that you'd see?
If you buy a Hallmark card and it has a chimpanzee on it, and I don't know if they still sell them or not, then it's likely a chimp from Missouri Primate Foundation or Connor. And his Hallmark legacy was, at 8 years old, Mike decided to take him on a Hallmark shoot. And after 8 hours of costume changes, he started to not listen to Mike. And so Mike started to get abusive. And at 8 years old, they come into their own. And Connor bit Mike on the leg and had people hiding under desks because he literally snapped. And Connor died very young. He was 28. And for the 27 years of his life, he lived in a cage being abused with even his bottle was shoved through the cage. He didn't even get fed a bottle. He tilted his own bottle. I have pictures. That's his legacy. Living in a cage that's too small with no enrichment, being forced to breed, being forced to do commercial work or, you know, photo ops or chimp parties or whatever it is. And so people go out and they buy these cards, and for all the joy that he brought people, he got 1 year to feel the grass beneath his feet and the sun on his back. He died. And I didn't get to say goodbye, and I'm sad about that, but I'm not sad that he no longer has to suffer, because chimps remember too. They remember. I mean, and I know this because chimpanzees, the moms that I saw, would try to hide their babies so that they didn't get darted and have their babies removed. So that's Connor's legacy. So, you know, don't buy a card if you see a chimp on it. Because, like I said, you see the product, you don't see the process. You know, if there was a picture of the footage that I took of Connor and, you know, in his cage rocking back and forth, who would buy that card? Nobody, you know?
You're crying now a little bit. Are there...
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. No, I'm just saying that are chimps in your life today, or do you still do anything with chimps?
I would love to. I don't think anybody would hire me because they'd be afraid. They would know if they did something wrong that I would do something about it. I mean, had I known that Tonia had Tonka in her basement, I told Jared I'd have drove a truck right through her freaking front door. But no, I don't have any chimps in my life. I am allowed to go and see Tonka, and we decided that we would wait until he was acclimated because, you know, sometimes seeing a friend, we didn't want him to, you know, miss me. We wanted him to be a chimp. And that's what he is. He's on a group with 17 other chimps. He's got friends. I've got video of him grooming. I mean, he's engaging in all these natural behaviors and developing these strong family bonds, and he looks beautiful. His coat is full. And so I do still, I mean, I don't think of, I mean, fame, I guess, isn't the word that I would use, but, I still remember the reason behind this whole documentary was something tragic. Yeah. You know, it was something terrible. And I'm so happy that I was able to, help people create a documentary about something that's so important. I just wish that it wasn't about, you know, some woman in a wig and false eyelashes that, you know, we're watching her go gamble. I mean, who cares? Who cares? And, you know, this isn't the issue. This is, you know, that I don't like the entertainment aspect of it, because to me, this was years and years and years of torture and abuse and sadness and heartbreak. I mean, I have to live with that and live with the fact that chimpanzees, people are still buying baby chimps. They're still buying baby chimps. You know, maybe it doesn't, just because it's illegal doesn't mean, you know, doesn't mean it's not happening. And I just can't believe that there still isn't a ban. It's just, how many more chimps have to die? How many more people's faces have to get torn off? You know, how Mike lost a nose. Miss Nash lost her face, her hands. I mean, how many more people have to suffer before we as a society say that enough is enough? It's 2024 and we still got to tell people why it's wrong to pry a baby off a mom and sell it for a profit. And, you know, I had compassion for Connie up until the point that she signed the chimps over to Tonia. And I realized that it wasn't about, I mean, Connie's a hoarder, and that's an illness. That's an illness. She was hoarding animals. But money was a component. I mean, Mike and Connie are responsible for more than 3/4 of the private chimp population. They sold over 150 chimpanzees in the United States and probably outside of the United States. And some of that was about money. And Mike, who so-called loved the chimps that he got in the divorce, tried to sell them to a roadside zoo for $50,000. Thank goodness Fish and Wildlife intervened and he was arrested. But I saw a quote. He was saying, these chimps are like my family. Well, he couldn't find work, so he sold them for $50,000 to some roadside zoo. Well, that was his intent. Thank goodness they were confiscated. But there's many more chimps and many more basements. And I hope that people will speak up. I really do.
Angela Scott, thank you for your time, and thank you for being on the PETA Podcast. Angela Scott, the whistleblower who got the key evidence that was at the heart of the case that you saw in Chimp Crazy, that Netflix documentary. For more on the Chimp Crazy story and how you can stop the abuse at private and roadside zoos, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link to this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on X at emilamok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. And get this podcast on YouTube at emilamok1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.